For generations, Israel had lived beneath the shadow of Egypt. They had cried out for freedom, but Pharaoh's power seemed impossible to overcome. Then, on one extraordinary night, everything changed. The empire that had enslaved them for generations suddenly wanted them gone. The night before had shattered Egypt's confidence. Pharaoh's resistance had finally broken. Throughout the land, grief filled Egyptian homes. And now the people of Egypt were urging the Israelites to leave. They feared that if Israel remained, even greater disaster might come upon them. Across Egypt, the message was clear: leave. Pharaoh's command meant that the Israelites were finally free to go. After centuries of forced labor, the impossible had happened. But freedom did not look like a celebration yet. It looked like families packing everything they could carry. There was no time for ordinary preparations. The Israelites carried their dough before it could rise. They wrapped their kneading bowls and gathered what little they had. This was not a carefully planned migration. It was an urgent departure, ordered by a moment they had waited generations to see. Then the movement began. Families stepped out of their homes and joined the growing crowd. Men carried supplies, mothers held their children, elders walked slowly beside them. Generation after generation had known Egypt as their home. Now they were walking away from it. At the front of this enormous company stood Moses. He was no longer simply a shepherd or a reluctant messenger. He had become the leader of a nation. Yet even Moses could not see everything that waited ahead. He knew only this: God had commanded them to go. Imagine carrying the hopes of an entire nation while knowing that one wrong decision could endanger everyone behind you. Moses had witnessed God's power, but he was still human. Ahead was uncertainty, behind was Egypt, and somewhere beyond the horizon was the land God had promised. The destination was more than a piece of land. It was a promise. God had told Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that their descendants would become a great nation. Now, centuries later, that promise was moving through the wilderness on human feet. The Exodus was not a small escape. It was the movement of an entire people. Families, children, elders, servants, livestock, and possessions traveled together. A people who had once been scattered under Egyptian oppression were now moving as one community. Behind them were the brick-making fields, the harsh labor, the Egyptian taskmasters, and the memories of generations born under oppression. Egypt had shaped Israel's identity for centuries. Leaving Egypt meant leaving behind more than buildings. They were leaving behind a way of life. But freedom can be frightening. Egypt had been cruel, yet it was familiar. The wilderness was unknown. Israel had spent generations learning how to survive under someone else's control. Now they had to learn how to walk by faith. The wilderness offered no obvious security, no walls, no Egyptian storehouses, no familiar streets, only sand, stone, sky, and a promise. Yet this was the road God had chosen for them. For centuries they had been called slaves. Now they were becoming something different, a people bound together by a covenant and a promise. The Exodus was not merely about getting Israel out of Egypt. It was about beginning the process of getting Egypt out of Israel. That first night outside Egypt must have felt strange. The people were free, but they did not yet know what freedom would demand. They had escaped Pharaoh. Now they had to learn dependence on God. Moses looked toward the darkness ahead. He could not see the Red Sea yet. He could not see Sinai. He could not see the battles, miracles, failures, or years of wandering that awaited them. He simply knew that the journey had begun. But the Exodus was not finished, simply because Egypt was behind them. Pharaoh could change his mind. The wilderness could become dangerous, and Israel would soon discover that leaving slavery was only the beginning of the journey. Pharaoh had released Israel, but freedom was difficult for him to accept. Soon, regret filled his heart. The king who had once commanded Israel to remain in Egypt now prepared to pursue the people who had escaped. Behind Israel, the Egyptian army began moving. Chariots rolled across the desert. Horses thundered beneath the night sky. Israel had thought the nightmare was over. They were about to discover that Pharaoh had not finished with them. Israel continued forward, unaware of how quickly the Egyptian army was approaching. Ahead lay the wilderness. Behind them came Pharaoh, and soon another obstacle would appear before them, one so enormous that human strength could not overcome it. Israel had escaped Egypt, but now the sea stood before them. Pharaoh's army was behind them. There appeared to be nowhere to go, and the greatest miracle of the Exodus was about to begin. The Exodus is often remembered as Israel's escape from Egypt, but beneath the spectacular miracles is a deeper transformation. God was not merely taking slaves out of a country, he was forming a people who would understand themselves through his covenant and his promises. There is a human struggle hidden inside the story. People can become accustomed to captivity. Even when freedom arrives, the familiar can feel safer than the unknown. Israel had left Egypt physically, but their mindset would take much longer to change. This is why the wilderness mattered. Israel needed more than a new location. They needed a new identity. The journey would test their patience, expose their fears, reveal their weaknesses, and teach them dependence. Sometimes the hardest part of faith is not knowing where the road ends. It is taking the first step when you can only see the beginning. Israel did not know what waited beyond Egypt, but they moved because God had told them to go. The Exodus teaches us that freedom is not always a destination. Sometimes it is a journey. God may bring you out of one season before he has shown you the next. The question is whether you will trust him while walking between the two. Egypt was behind them, but the Red Sea was ahead. The wilderness was waiting, and Israel was about to discover that the God who could deliver them from Pharaoh could also make a way where there seemed to be no way. If you want to uncover the Bible beyond the familiar verses, its forgotten characters, hidden struggles, dramatic battles, mysteries, and life-changing lessons, subscribe to Bible Uncovered. The Exodus has only begun. Next, Israel will stand before the impossible, the Red Sea.